Hello, hubby, and welcome back to Rendering Unconscious. So fun to chat with you.
Thank you very much. It's great because we do this basically every day, but not under this on this platform.
Exactly. But you just put out this great newsletter talking about all the things coming up and being thankful for all the support you've been getting. And I just wanted to talk about everything that's been going on because things are really flourishing and there's so much going on and it's also great.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's when you're living in it and living it, I mean, as we do, sometimes I feel that I lose the distance in a way because it's like, being in the eye of the storm or whatever. But I do think that summing things up in newsletters for subscribers or just friends or supporters is a good thing because it gives me a kind of a bird's eye perspective also about what's going on. And as you say, I think maybe there's unusually much going on right now. And it's wonderful, of course, because it's something that I worked towards and we have worked towards. And now it's coming to fruition and it's really, really wonderful.
It really is. So let's start with the Source Magic mentoring because that you've done it kind of unofficially in the past, but you
Yeah.
kind of officially started offering it these one-to-one sessions, and that's
Yeah.
been like hugely successful. There's so many great people you've been talking to, and you've been getting so much great feedback.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the origin story of that method or approach is simply that it's imbued or inherent in the magical tradition. If we speak like, about the occult teaching, stuff like that, that there is some kind of mentorship going on, whether you're like a young student looking for guidance, or if you're like a senior or an elder hopefully who has something to offer. That's part of the dynamic that's been going on, for thousands of years. And I have been, involved in that both ways also. But as you know, I'm also very interested in, yeah, let's call it like psychoanalysis, basically, or how we can find deeper levels of ourselves in the active communication with another person. And you and I, we've tied it in also with the Burroughs and Geisen and the Jen approach of the third mind, meaning something new and hopefully epiphanic comes up in conversation or when you relieve yourself of the burden of something, catharsis. You want to be free of certain emotional clusters and stuff. And in the traditional psychoanalytic method, that's it's not one way, of course, but there's a lot of giving and giving and giving from the analyst hand towards this third possibility or towards the psychoanalyst. And that has a great function, meaning the cathartic one. And that's, I guess, is like an inheritance from or a heritage from um, confession in the Catholic Church, for instance, and other, person to person gossiping, even just sort of letting off steam and verbalizing what you have on the inside. That's something that is highly, highly magical. Formulating what's on the inside in order to externalize it and look at it from a different perspective. And as you know, I was also in psychoanalysis for 4.5 years, quite a while ago, and it was highly, highly relevant and meaningful to me, and also, revelatory. It revealed so many things, and I was able to break that down with the help of my analyst. But it was basically me doing the blah blah, 4.5 years of blah blah blah, and
5 days a
eventually
week.
5 days a week, exactly. And eventually things dissolved. I had to break down my own, what do you call it, self-deception in a way. And then over the years since, I think these strains sort of wanted to merge, where you have this kind of tutor system, but at the same time, not necessarily in the magical process. Could also deal with other things that are more mundane or emotional or psychological, having to do with a relationship or ideals and goals. And of course, one way of looking at magic is simply doing what you want to do, right? That's the Crowleyan definition of causing change to occur in conformity with one's will. And that's beautiful. I want more, magical things in there, the transcendental, the fantastic, literally fantastic, and sort of leading a more amazing life that is not causal. And having worked with this conceptually, I came to a point where I said, okay, so let's give this a try, meaning inviting people in to talk about their issues or things they want to solve or resolve, either short term or long term, in a kind of a mentorship thing. And it's been very, very interesting. I know and I hope for everyone who comes in, but it's been for me also to take on this sort of semi-official role of being this person, because my own experiences of this dynamic, it's very, very positive. So I hope that I can bring something to the table that is slightly more than just being a listener, slightly more than asking people, so how does that make you feel, or these classic therapeutic guidances or guidelines. I want to be involved in more direct conversation with the people who come in, and I want to. Yeah, almost consciously evoke that third mind aspect, leading people in conversation to them realizing by the fact that there is something in the conversation that evokes a brand new perspective that is impossible, absolutely impossible to cogitate. We can't evoke it by rationally cogitating or just like spinning the yarn or spinning the wheel indefinitely. There needs to be um, something random, something personal, something having to do with the chemistry or the dynamic between the person who comes to me and me myself. And so far it's been very, very interesting, and I think I will probably write something about it too. But I'm just very happy that it's active and going, and I do welcome people to contact me if they want to be in this kind of session or sessions. It could be one time or it could be long term. That's neither here nor there for me. I just hope that I can help people based on what they want to share in discretion and secrecy, of course, confidence. So yeah, that's been a pretty big thing that is new in my overall work. It has grown, and I feel very, very satisfied with that, because it's also something that gives me insight, and it trains me, learning while doing in a way, and it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And you did write about the similarities between psychoanalysis and ritual magic for our first conference in London in 2016. And that was a very early episode of Rendering
Yeah.
Unconscious, episode 7. So I will link to that as well so people can listen to that talk, because that was a really
Hmm.
good paper that you formulated. And for
Hmm.
people who are looking at magic, from the outside, I don't know if people realize how psychological it is. It's very, I've seen so many similarities to like identifying patterns in yourself. It's not just about like creating change in the outside world. Like, of course, the outer and inner is connected, and you have to find out like why you're blocking yourself, because we're usually the ones in our own way. What's getting in your way? What kind of narratives have you internalized that you can break down, that you can begin to shift so that you can have a better life, so that you can make changes in your physical material reality. So it's a dynamic process that you have to interrogate the outer and the inner. You can't just expect to, say whatever, a prayer, a wish, or whatever, and then have things change. You have to do the work. It's a lot of work.
Mm. Absolutely. And I think also, as I mentioned in that paper you were referring to about the similarities between psychoanalysis and ritual magic, there is also this inherent quality of what I'm offering, basically coming from my magical practice background, which is the integration of creative techniques. So it's not only mental, it's not only the formulating or the expressing of words. I also strongly encourage people to work with, for instance, like the cut-up technique or creating talismans, things that for outside people or muggles, as Rowling or Harry Potter would call them, they have a hard time fathom how powerful and potentially very, very beneficial it can be to, again, externalize, not necessarily in verbal form, but in making little objects, making artworks that sort of become crystallizations of what it is that's bugging you, or what it is that you're striving for, what it is that is your ideal. Meaning, again, the very important things of dragging the problematic cluster out of your system, out of your unconscious, or your inside, and bringing it out so that you can look at it. And then you might be confounded, say, what is this? And there, of course, an extra pair of eyes and an extra mind with experience with this can be very helpful in sort of disentangling what's there. So it's also an active approach. It's not just talking about it. It's like giving people the tools to work with stuff that I know from my own life experience has worked really well for me, and that's, what more can you give?
Exactly, and you have such a wealth of experience as well, because your book that we talked about before, but it hadn't come out yet. Now your book is out, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians: Life in the Occult Underground. It's now out, and you talk about all the different experiences you've had, and you have been trained, formally and through the touching of hands, as our friend Jen says, by so many different traditions. You've gone so many different places with, of course, the OTO and Temple of Psychic Youth and COS, and going to Tibet and learning from lamas, and learning from shamanic practitioners, and all sorts of different kinds of traditions and people. So you really have like a wealth of experience to draw from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for me, again, it's the same process, to formulate and to write that book was a great evocation, not only of my past as a chronological set of stories, life stories. Everyone has those. But for me, it was remarkable, again, to meet the remarkable magicians, but also to see simply how much of everything there was and how much that has affected my life from very early on. I would say even from almost day one, like I write in the book, that the person who bought me my cradle was Ornette Coleman, who was this, incredibly innovative jazz musician who was playing at my father's club in Stockholm at the time where I was born. He bought me my cradle. So symbolically, I've been rocking ever since, in a way, in a very outsider, innovative, creative, extreme kind of cultural environment. And I think at first I didn't understand the subtitle of my book. It's called Meetings with Remarkable Magicians: Life in the Occult Underground. But retrospectively, I see exactly how fitting that is, because I have not been in the Freemasonic environment. I have not been in the sort of white light or New Age or Wicca environments. I have been beneath the surface. I've been in the underground, in Topi, in the Church of Satan. OTO is probably sort of a little bit more above ground, but and some Golden Dawn groups, and then all the other freestyle magicians that I met. But the schematic beauty of all of this is, of course, that anything that sort of pierces the veil or the crust comes from the underground, comes from the very fertile soil where things are not affected by morals or moralisms or petty infighting, where it's just like this really strong creative force just wanting to pierce the crust and the veil and manifest. And where does it manifest? Well, it manifests within culture. And that's one of the main lessons that I got from all of my main mentors, who were all, incidentally or not, beautiful artists. LaVey was such a great musician. Genesis was an all-round conceptual artist. Kenneth Anger was such a beautiful filmmaker, and many others also, who have just used culture as such, cultural expressions as their talismanic agents on different levels. So I feel that I've been to a good school, not like, Hogwarts, where it's all about magic in itself. thematically, but getting to know my own tools within this field or force field of general culture. And then again, coming up along the line, along the sort of timeline with phrases like, terms like occulturation. Occulturation is the movement from the underground, from the occult into the mainstream. So there you have the occulturation process. And that for me, I can see it so much in my life, all the things that I've done. And that also touches with the source magic mentorship in the sense that I've been brewing, I've been gestating, I've been nurturing these seed for a long, long time, and they cannot appear, they cannot pierce the crust until the time is right. And now the time is right for so many of these things that I have been harnessing in a way. And I think the book, the publishing of the book, which just happened, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, is that opening the floodgate in a way of this is what I have to offer, this is my life experience, this is what I can do for you or you or you or for the cosmos, whatever. And again, that I'm very happy about that, and it will be interesting to see what kind of interest there will be in the book beyond the fairly small, almost cultic environment that are, for instance, like my readers or my fans or the same kind of occult environment. It has potential to reach way, way, way beyond that because in general, it has a general attraction or appeal in the sense that I very much feel like a figure out of Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey or the monomythic quest in a way, where you feel, you hear the calling as a young man or as a young woman, and you simply, the calling is so strong that you have to go out there and go on these adventures and fight the foes and get over the hurdles, and then eventually you return with a lot of experience. And then it's your duty. I'm duty bound, honor bound to share that. That's part of my tradition. And that's basically what's going on right now, I think, now that I approach my third Saturn return.
Yes, well, you're in your second Saturn return. Now you're on your third Saturn cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And
Saturn
that because
return won't be for another 29 years.
yeah, we should mention that also because the reason I mentioned that is that the working title of the book was Two Times Saturn. I wanted to sync it with me leaving the second Saturn return.
Yeah, it's great. And you're going to be offering like a one-time class or the first class on your kind of methods in November, right? November 19th.
Yes, yes, that's something that will be the first of many now that I've basically my mind is working overtime in formulating all of these things, and I think that again is part of the same modus operandi. I feel full. I need to express and get stuff out of my system, not in order to be rid of it, but to formulate it for, you could call it a new generation or for simply for a new audience in a way. What is he talking about? What is his experience really? Because I can talk and talk on hundreds of podcasts, but I think that some things need to be formulated like in book form or in lecture form. The lectures will probably be or end up as chapters of a book about what I call source magic or the no-handed path. And it ties in, of course, with magical tradition, with philosophical traditions, a shamanic kind of connection to early human Homo sapiens times and formations of the human mind and how we survive. And I think that's the reason why there's so much occulture in our culture today is simply because I guess what Jung would call the collective unconscious is sort of reminding us very fervently that it's time to wake up to this kind of animistic or shamanic consciousness because our own habitat is in grave danger of being changed to the extent that we no longer fit in, that we are no longer able to survive. The Earth as such, the overall biotope will be fine. but we're basically punishing ourselves by behaving the way we do and the way we have. So I think that by making all of this magic available in fictional form, in academic form, in active form, in magical groups and stuff like that, in psychedelics, all of these things speak the same language, and that's basically a language of uh, encouraging the awakening in humanity.
Very cool. So how do people sign up for that class?
Yeah, it's very simple. I am the host of that class. Usually, as you so well know, we work together with Morbid Anatomy for our classes and events and lectures. But this No-Handed Path / Source Magic first lecture, I will host myself. So it's basically by paying $9 to me via PayPal, Carl@carlabrahamsson.com. I'm sure you can write that in the episode notes also. So it's a direct ticket, and then people will get a link for the Zoom lecture a couple of days before it actually happens on November 19th.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, it's great to have classes specifically about magic because, yeah, we've done so many great classes with morbid anatomy, and we still are. You just wrapped up the magic of occult cinema,
Yeah,
um, and I'm about to do a class on Tim Burton, and you have a new class too coming up in February on Kenneth
yeah.
Anger.
Yeah, that's right. It's again, it's dissemination for a new audience of stuff I already have in my mind, so to speak, and it's something like I greatly enjoy. I have realized over this past year basically how much I love to write about movies, and that's been an increasing frequency in that kind of writing. And so for me to talk about Kenneth Anger, whom I knew and whose films I loved, so early on, before I met him, of course, but they were like crystallizing agents of or sources of inspiration for me that became even more so when I had met him and we had struck up a friendship, and we met so many times over the decades, and I eventually made the documentary about him called Kenneth Anger Cinemagician. And I think that it's a kind of a no-brainer then that I wanted to combine all of these things, my memories, my knowledge of his films, my knowledge of the Crowleyan system, which was very important for Anger, and of course the Hollywood Babylon aspect with all these salacious, scandalous tidbits about old Hollywood. For me, it's like a cluster or a fire that is still burning very strongly inside me. So I look forward very much to sharing the quite unique insight and materials that I have with people who also like Anger, and present it in this kind of 4 sessions, lectures in a class form.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic, and that's
Yeah.
Sundays in February. I'm looking forward to that. But it makes sense too that the class that's going to be specifically about magical technique. Morbid Anatomy is a great audience of people who are into like the uncanny or the weird or the morbid side of life, looking at death. But it's not specifically like a magical order in any way. So it makes sense to do classes that are on actual magical practice and technique yourself.
Yeah, I think so. It's just so amazing how well we can communicate over these technical platforms, and have that kind of outreach with many people, regardless of where they are on the planet. I find it very, very fascinating, and the biggest hurdle is basically putting it at the good time, so as many time zones as possible can be there live. Of course, I will make the recordings available to those who have got a ticket but couldn't actually make it to the thing because of whatever reasons. And that's another thing, this dissemination of documentation is so easy today, and I find that very, very, very good.
Yeah, and you also have so many lectures and your films all up at your Substack.
Yeah. This I decided to start a Substack not for Carl Abrahamsson per se, but specifically for the Fenris Wolf, the occultural journal that I publish more or less regularly. And the thing is that when you have a journal in book form, it takes a year, maybe 2 years to put it all together. And just recently, number 12 came out, and it's, jam-packed with stuff. But it's mostly, essays, substantial thoughts, ideas, research projects. Whereas under the same kind of occultural umbrella, there's so much going on in which is you could call it like smaller form, smaller shape and size, like new books coming out. So on the Fenris Wolf Substack, there is a lot of my own creativity, but there are also book reviews, recommendations, like a little, I don't know, yeah, like a newsletter. I call it the Fenris Wolf newsletter. What you would expect from a newsletter is basically news about what's going on. So I share material from works in progress. All of my films are at the Fenris Wolf Substack. All of my recorded video lectures, what I call the occultural lectures, are also available at the Fenris Wolf Substack. So there's a lot of material there, and I can just see it could grow indefinitely, especially at the pace that we're producing stuff. And I greatly enjoy it also. So there's a difference there. The Fenris Wolf is like uh, a heavy duty thing that manifests occasionally because it's just so heavy. And then the Fenris Wolf Substack is more like pop, 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 little news flashes coming out. And it's wonderful to work with.
Yeah, and tell us about the Fenris Wolf number 12 that just came out. I got my copies and I've just started it. It's a thick,
Yeah.
great volume.
Yeah. And I think it's a good I mean they're all good, of course, but it feels like the latest one is always the favorite, right? And I greatly enjoyed working with it. And of course, this is not a day to day where I work 8 hours a day on the Fenris Wolf. It's something that happens now and then. I have some kind of imaginary deadline that I, share with people, and then that will be broken, and another one appears, etc. It takes a long time because life. However, when it is done and I'm in the editing, I realize what a beauty it is to be able to assemble that kind of eclectic material, because it's not really academic, although I'm not against it in any way. And there are some papers in there, essays that are decidedly, are academic, but most of it is just, I would say, pretty left field, eclectic, open-minded, experimental, very personal, very subjective, and that's exactly how I want it. I want it to be completely non-denominational. The wolf in itself doesn't represent any kind of Fenris Wolfian perspective other than the open-minded eclecticness. And that goes for me too, whatever the Fenris Wolf is, it doesn't represent like one order or one group, and I think that's also one of the reasons why I came up with this thing which I call the no-handed path, because there's even in the supposedly open-minded magical world, there is this sort of, I don't know, fake tantric analysis of the left-hand path and the right-hand path, meaning the approaches to physicality and the sensualism, and it's either for or against. This kind of a dualism that has created really nothing good in human culture, just more division, more I don't know, one-sidedness, more intolerance. So I think that my no-handed path will be attractive to people who've just had enough of that, who want to be like a merged yin and yang symbol, being in the absolute middle, looking out and having a great perspective about all the unnecessary division that is out there. So I think the Fenris Wolf is an example of, or an expression of that also, is that I collect the material as editor. Of course, there's choice there. There is some sort of subjective level, but it is at the same time me being very inclusive and I don't know. I love the word eclectic. I want Fenris Wolf to be an inspiring goodie bag where you don't have to read it from beginning to end. You can pick an essay, read it, be inspired, and say, that was not for me. I'll go to the next one. Or they can go, wow, that's amazing. I'll go to the next one. To have this sort of feeling of amazement of that it's actually possible. Because where else today can you read about, intelligent expressions or contemporary analyses of the world of magic or culture, or even the greater outer world also, but with those magical anthropological goggles. I don't know anywhere basically. So I think the Fenris Wolf has carved out a niche that is very unique, and that's also why it's so popular and doing so well. And I think that it reaching out to even newer and sort of wider audiences will be good for everyone. There's a lot there, and I think I hear now, after we have been out on our adventures in the world of academia at conferences, etc., that there is great interest also for academics to be part of this approach, because I'm not a rigid academic editor. The form means less to me than the content.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, like in one of the earlier ones, Fund Myself 8, and I have a paper in there with Ingo Lambrecht. And when I invited him to contribute, I said basically like you can write what you really think. Or that's what when I invited him to the journal, that's what he said back. He's like, so I can actually write what I really think without like editing it down for like the audience, the academic audience.
Yeah.
And how nice that is for people who are usually in these more rigid environments to be able to write more freely and say what they really think about things without being having to like, yeah, prove why their thoughts are valid.
Yeah, exactly. There's an inherent level of inertia integrated in the academic system. And also, I believe that, I don't know if that's always been the case, or maybe I've just become more aware of it now that there is this big field called the study of, for instance, Western esotericism in academia today, which sort of tangents or is um, influenced by what I call magical anthropology. Magical anthropology is the center, and then can take cultural or artistic expressions. You could take natural scientific expressions, or in the humanities, it could even be the study of religions, of course. And this field of the study of Western esotericism is all kind of subservient in a way, or spinning around magical anthropology. However, the academic environments dealing with this are almost cultic. They do the work for each other, and they reference each other, and the books end up in university libraries but hardly beyond. And they worship or work in a kind of a silent authority of a structure. It's all very emblematic and schematic of cultic behavior, and that's concerns me a little bit, because when you study subjects that are so central for human development and so central for human culture, then you have to be careful and also diligent in the correct treatment of the materials. And you have to have an understanding of it, of course. I would say that it's actually goes against protocol to not have any kind of practical experience of magic, for instance, or the occult. I'm a strong believer in you know, scientist participation or anthropologist participation, because, how can you write about something that you don't know anything about yourself? It's paradoxical. So in that sense, I believe that Fenris Wolf is also like a breather. It's a kind of a waterhole, an oasis for academics who feel this kind of draconian pressure, and that they can read stuff and get ideas and be part of a creative flow between you as a writer and the readers who are inspired by what you write.
And you started Feminist in 1989?
Yeah, That's right. It was first like a Temple of Psychic Youth specific fanzine, reflecting my own interests as an editor, of course, but there was a lot of Topi mythology, Topi culture involved there, and including, asking for material from Anton LaVey and William Burroughs, and they were all so supportive of the Fenris Wolf. And then it just kept on rolling, the first three issues. Then I had to take like an 18-year break because of life and many other things. But then it was sort of revived again in the 2010s, and we're now up to issue number 12 and are actively working on issue number 13 now. So it's an ongoing and very powerful book, I'd say, journal
Yes,
project.
exactly. And Feminist Wolf 9 is is the collected papers from our first conference in London, and 11 is the collected papers from our second conference in Italy. And this third one is going to be based on the conference in Copenhagen, Visionary Medium, which is talking about magic of cinema and psychoanalysis of film, but also expanded because we've also done a psychoanalysis art and occult series at Morbid Anatomy for a few years from the pandemic and forward. And so we're going to include some of those papers and other writings about magic and
Mhm.
psychoanalysis and film specifically.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be an amazing, amazing issue.
Most definitely. I'm looking forward to it. Um, Yeah, and then what else? Morbid Anatomy's also started offering on-demand classes. So if people
Mhm.
missed our classes in person, they're there on demand. The one that you did on Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, the History of Magic, is there, and your Magic of Occult Cinema, and the class we did together on the cut up method. So
Mhm.
those are there. I'll link to all of these things in the show
Mhm.
notes.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's great to work with people like Morbid Anatomy who are truly open-minded and who can offer these things for people who are, I would say, very, very hungry. I was talk about like a new generation, but it could of course be people of all ages that simply come across stuff like, the Fenris Wolf Substack or the Morbid Anatomy homepage with all of the stuff that's there, and their community on Patreon also. And it's just remarkable how hungry people are because they are not fed this kind of stuff in their usual channels in a way. As we all know, I think streaming and gaming and all of these things are essentially, I don't know, very pacifying tools, very pacifying platforms. Whereas if you come to somewhere like us or Morbid Anatomy, is like, whoa, there are actually people working with these things, and that kind of wow experience I experienced early on, but in vivo, so to speak, because there was no internet at the time. So it was all about human connections and books and physical meetings and stuff, and it's simply great, and it's good with these technical platforms, the possibility of reaching out even wider than I ever could in person.
Absolutely. No, everything's at the tip of your fingers nowadays. And for yeah, a long time now. And I love that Morbid Anatomy, one of their hashtags is Morbid Anatomy, Morbid Academy. It's like its own
Yeah.
alternative education.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's exactly what happens when the academic world becomes inert. It's basically uh, showing is showing resilience in the wrong way, not by being really literally inclusive of new ideas and new perspectives, but actually, just safeguarding and being very diligent at preserving. It's when, the health of something conservative goes into the ill health of something reactionary, just for the sake of it, keeping to a system or sticking to an attitude that allows for no new infusion, no new blood, and then they make efforts of making politically correct decisions, but that's not the same thing. Those things could also be inherently inert, and inherently reactionary. It's all about, I think, creating an environment of learning which really takes different perspectives in consideration, like really in the sense of just really allowing people to ventilate and present new aspects. And then, if they need to analyze that by their, peer pressure or peer reviewing, then that's another thing. That could be a more formal thing. But the open-mindedness, I see that as missing today. And I think that will be part of a potential downfall of respect for, academic tradition, academic institutions, etc. But then again, they are going to have a hard time competing with stuff like morbid anatomy and other like alternative platforms for the dissemination of knowledge.
It's true. That being said, we did just come back from a very refreshing conference in Copenhagen that
Yeah.
Casper and Tim put together. I had them on the podcast to promote it, and it was a sold out event, and it was at Copenhagen University, such a beautiful setting,
Mhm.
fantastic buildings and rooms that we got to present in. And they did a great mix of mixing, scholars and practitioners and independent scholars with academics, and April Shayla did her performance art and did a great performance, and Roberto and John Cousins did the fantastic ritual with Jean-Louis playing music. So yeah, it was a great mix of things.
Yes, absolutely. It was really fantastic, but I think that's more of an exception than a rule,
It was
unfortunately. Yeah,
totally an exception. It was like going back to how I imagine it began, or imagine it should have been.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, but then again, everything is like it is, and things changed because of individual initiatives. And I think you and I are working in, it's not even in a tradition in a way, we're creating something new with whatever tools or platforms that we have and seeing where that goes. And I think so far it's been very, very interesting in the sense that we are producing. You're producing this podcast, and I have Trapar Books, the publishing company, and we create so many things together and individually, but it's all under the same kind of umbrella in a way, which is actually bringing forth of an older spirit, suggesting not only Burroughs and Geisen and the cut-up technique or the magical topy, but also older strains of individualism. You don't need to call it anything beyond that, encouraging the individual to bloom on her own terms, in her own conditions, and not be too affected by outside demands. And then, of course, you can imbue that with how much or how little magic you want to, or how little or much psychology you want to. But I think for me, the key thing is simply to present material that contains the spirit or the signal that this is what I do, and I hope that you will be inspired by this, not to mimic or emulate, but to take on the inspiration and move that into your system and be a beautiful expression of yourself, basically. It's a very simple message that needs no fluff, it needs no symbology, it needs no rationalizations or cogitations. It's just a spirit of a very harmonious life. And I think one of the key things there is to encourage people to individuate. Magic and psychology and psychoanalysis can be parts of that individuation process, but it basically comes from inside each human individual on her own terms. And no one else should or can interfere with that. We can help, we can nudge, we can inspire. That's the most important thing. But it's essentially up to each and everyone to deal with this. And if they don't, then surely someone else will for them. And that's not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Individuation is really key, and yeah, nobody can do it for you. The people tend to be, not all people, but there's a tendency in the culture, because it's such a consumerist culture that we live in, to try to sell people like 10 easy steps. or, buy this product. That was we always joke like with all these makeup ads. It's a new formula. This one will make you younger, more beautiful, etc. But people need to get out of this condition of being the passive consumer or believing that it's up to somebody else to help them with this kind of process. Like, oh, if only I buy this thing, then my life will be great. Or if only I can meet this person, or if only I can achieve this goal. But it needs to be coming from inside. Achieving goals is good, of course, but it can't, it's nothing that somebody else can do for you. So if anybody says, oh, I have the answers, warning, warning, the better thing to do is the psychoanalytic way, which is to realize that the analyst doesn't know what's best for you, but helps you to realize that you yourself know within and gives you the space to be able to talk through what you need to talk through to get there, to realize what you need to know to move forward. And the same thing can happen magically, but all of these different individuation processes can only happen from each person. And that's really the key. And like you said, it comes from inside. And
Yeah.
tying it back to what you said in the beginning, what we can do as people who have been through these processes, lots of psychoanalysis, lots of magical practice, lots of creative practice, is just say, hey, this is what worked for us. And maybe that you will find that inspiring. And we could always, yeah, share insights of things that we've learned along the way, from doing this work for such a long time. And hope that that is inspiring and helps you to figure out the best path forward for yourself.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's a great summing up. And I think for me, I don't know when that happened, but it became gradually um, more like an insight that it was kind of undeniable that, and that's also part of individuation, where you come to the point where whatever it is that I know that I have to do is undeniable. It's also inevitable. I've come to the point of no return in a way. And that's, of course, can be a feeling of anxiety in that, but it's also a relief because there is no turning back, right? You just have to go with this spirit or this flow or this regimen or attitude. It could be so many things. And I feel that I have certainly had my share of hurdles in a way, but mostly it's been a very pleasant ride in the sense that although material challenges often come, but they often go, and you work consistently and diligently with what it is you feel that you need to work with, then things have a tendency to work out. And then you could analyze that and say, oh, that's not magic, that's, determination and psychology. Or you could call it something magical, like, synchronicities appear when you're on the right track, etc., etc. But all of these things are like moot points. They're like redundant attempts at analysis of something that is inevitable. And that is, once you know what you have to do with your life, then there's no turning back. Then you simply have to do that. Because if you retract and if you try to walk on some kind of parallel path to smooth out aggression coming from parents or society, whatever, you will be neurotic. It's really that simple. You can only be totally harmonious when you're in line with yourself to the greatest extent possible. Everything else is a compromise, and sometimes you have to, of course, but the less the compromise, the happier the person.
Well, should we stop there?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I'll see you soon, hubby.
Very soon
Thank
indeed.
you for
Thank you
coming
very
on Rendering
much.
Unconscious.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.